Welcome back to another episode of the Summer Friday series right here on the Intentional Intern podcast. This week, I'm joined by Dr. Tadé Ayeni. Dr. Ayeni is an assistant professor, executive consultant, founding editor of the Clarity Over Noise newsletter, and author of Clarity of Thought, Thinking Clearly About Leadership, Strategy, and Systems. From his family's journey as Nigerian immigrants to his amazing story on how he works with all walks of life today, Dr. Ayeni's work is all about the power of community, clarity, and intentional leadership. In this episode, Dr. Ayeni and I discuss the work that he does within the leadership space, the difference between managing and leading, leadership dynamics in theory and practice, and so much more. Plus, Dr. Ayeni shares practical frameworks like his Clarity Stack to help you lead with purpose. For more from Dr. Ayeni, check out his book and his information that'll be linked below. With that, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, Tadé. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm even better if that's even possible than great right now because we have the chance to talk. I've been so excited for us to have this conversation and really bring your expertise to the podcast and just who you are. So I'm very thankful that you have decided to come on the show.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me. Something that I was telling you before we started is that I think that this podcast is gaining momentum, and I wouldn't be shocked if you're top, 1, 2 in your category like 2 or 3 years from now. So I'm just thankful to get in on the ground floor.
I really appreciate that. And of course, I know who you are, but I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. So I am Dr. Tadé Ayeni. What I currently do right now is I'm an assistant professor and a director of leadership education at a medical school in the Pacific Northwest. So there's like the intro of this is what I'm doing, and there's the intro of like this is my background. Which one would you prefer?
Give us all of it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well then, take a seat. Um, whenever I talk about myself, I like to start by just telling some foundational stories because I think like anybody could read my resume or go onto my LinkedIn page and you could see where I got my degrees, blah blah blah. But when you hear someone's shaping story, you can learn like a whole lifetime in about 5 minutes. So just like one of my shaping stories is that I was born in Nigeria, West Africa, but my family moved to the United States when I was about 2 or 3. One kind of unique thing that happened was that my dad graduated med school right before we moved to the United States. So he goes from walking across the stage as Dr. Ayeni, future physician, to coming to the United States and taking any job he could take just to help keep our family afloat. And so, we had that. And so we had that kind of situation for several years. Like as an adult, sometimes like as a kid, like you don't realize that you're poor, and then as an adult, like you look back and you're like, wait a minute, I think we was poor. So, I look back and, think about, how many times you have to move and, sometimes sleeping on the mattress directly on the floor and all these types of things. And the reason I'm telling this story is that my story is unique in that we went from that kind of from that kind of a life to literally it felt like one weekend we moved from that neighborhood to this really nice neighborhood and we're homeowners and everything changed. And so just the kind of drastic nature of having the whole trajectory of our family change like that, like that makes an impression on you as a fifth grader. And so I went back and asked my parents, like, what happened? And so what happened was two things. My mom decided to go back to school to become a social worker, and she kind of wrapped up and entered the working world. And my dad was finally able to match to do his residency. So he got out of residency and was now a full doctor. And so I really took two important lessons from that. Firstly, the transformative power of higher education. Less than one generation, my family's whole trajectory changes because my parents were able to access these things and to open up what it could do for them. But then number two, what I took from that was this. Whenever you take any any set of human beings and you put them under a lot of physical, financial, emotional, psychological pressure, you put them under a lot of stress, one of two things will happen every time. They'll either turn on each other and start blaming each other and, is everyone for themselves, or they'll double down on coming together and on having each other's backs. And in those times when my family was just trying to make it, new kind of immigrants to this country, I saw my parents again and again and again. They had opportunities to, blame, but they just doubled down on family and on having each other's backs. So the reason I'm telling these two stories is because fast forward 20 years into the future, I'm now trying to figure out what I'm going to study, and I thought back to the memory that I just told you about. And I thought, what I witnessed with my parents, especially that second thing, if you could bottle that up and you could help a team to do that or help an organization to do that, that is powerful. And so I realized, oh, there's like a field where you actually study that. Like if you think about leadership at its core, John Maxwell has a book called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and he defines leadership in the most essential way. He says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so I wanted to have an opportunity to kind of study what I saw firsthand work, but in a more formal way. So long story short, I eventually got a doctoral degree in higher education leadership because it allowed me to study how to access higher ed for everyone and how to open it up so that my parents' story wouldn't be like this outlier. It would be like so normal that like you're not even that impressed. Like that to me would be amazing. But then number two, how could we foster environments in teams and in different types of companies where you see that doubling down, that coming together, and that creating community. So ever since then, I just kind of spent my career studying that and figuring out how to do that long term, and that's all culminated in a book that I just released called Clarity of Thought: Thinking Clearly About Leadership Systems and Strategy.
Okay, this is exactly why I wanted you to explain all of it. I love it. I love it. And I love that you plugged your book. I'm going to have to look at that. I'm definitely going to have to take a look at that. And I thought something that was so interesting about your story, like, which thank you for sharing, by the way. Your story, like you said, is you want it to be for what happened with your parents. You want that to be something that can be accessible for everyone and is something that everyone can enjoy and they don't have to see as a rare thing. And I think also when people look at it as this rarity, some people also can internalize that into, oh, that may never be me. And they can count themselves out that way. And so I love that you emphasize that fact of it not being an outlier. And as someone who has just walked the stage with their MBA degree, so their secondary yes, their secondary form of education. I can say there's so many pieces to a degree that make it valuable, not even just with the knowledge, but even just what you go through to get that degree as well, and how that also bounds you together in how you present yourself as a leader, and how I've been able to implement that within my work experience or even within my personal life. And like you said, leadership is to influence, and that has built who I am as a leader now in terms of the resilience, the diligence, the discipline, but also understanding how I can utilize that degree to, like you said, almost provide hope in some form. So I think also knowledge is power, and that power enables you to also instill not only in elevating others, but instill that hope as well. So I love that you talked about that. Look, I'm just repeating back what I heard. And I think it's so interesting to hear you kind of talk about from what your parents did and then down to what you did based off of their stories. I think that's very, very inspiring. And from your perspective in learning about leadership, what have been some of the most interesting points that you've had as you've been studying this process and understanding what leadership means or what it means to be a leader?
Okay, I'll answer that by telling you the story of my dissertation. And so my dissertation was a phenomenological study of the experiences of Black minority medical students as they matriculate to and through medical school. So just for context, phenomenology just means that you take the human kind of experience and you treat it as something that can be studied. Normally we study like an event or a physical object, but you can study the human experience in that way. So the basic premise of my dissertation was I would sit with these Black medical students and basically ask them two questions. Number one, did you see anyone who looked like you being a doctor growing up? And everyone was like, no, right? And like, was that a thing that you even knew you could become? Everyone's like, no. But then that led to my second question, which is, so, but here you are being the thing that you never saw, that you that that you believed that you couldn't be. How'd you do it? Tell me the stories. So my bias was that I expected to hear stories about the large structures. What I mean is I got into this program and it had a grant for people who look like me and all these types of things, and there was like some mention of that, but most of the stories were like this story that I'm about to tell you. One young woman said, "Okay, I was at high school. I was taking advanced placement classes, and things were going well, and I just decided to give myself a break for 1 year. So like maybe 10th grade I took AP, and then in 11th grade I'm not going to do AP. I mean, she wasn't dropping out of school. She's like, I just am going to take normal math. I'm just going to take normal English, right? And then I'll go back to AP senior year. And she said, my AP teacher, when she saw that I wasn't in her class, she came and found me and she said, "Why are you not in my class?" And she said, "Oh, I'm just going to do normal classes." And she said, "My AP teacher responded in this way, and this stayed with me." She said, "The teacher looked at me and said, Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. Go back where you belong." And so her view of me being in these AP classes wasn't, this is a young Black girl in spaces that often don't welcome young Black girls and that you normally don't see young Black girls in. She's overachieving. That's how I thought of myself. Her view of me was like, you're not doing nothing special. This like you can handle this. And she said just that one phrase, Mm-mm-mm-mm. Go back where you belong. She said, I went to college and I found spaces that didn't welcome me. And I just couldn't get her voice out of my head. I went to med school and the spaces weren't always welcoming. And she said, and so all of my participants of the dissertation, they spent most of their time telling me stories about what I eventually termed a culture of positive expectation, which is they admitted they were born into these larger societies that didn't expect much from someone who looked like them, but they had a small community kind of wrap around them and stay with them through the whole process. It's almost like if you've ever seen a plant growing in a sidewalk. That's obviously not the optimal place where a plant should grow, but if it has a little bit of soil, a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of water, it can still grow. And so they told stories about those communities, and the real connection for me is, remember, this is me who, in my formative years, I saw my parents, I saw the same things, but I didn't have the words for it. And so the kind of full circle moment is I realized two things. I realized number one, community means everything. And the best leaders, going back to your original question, is the best leaders create communities. They create communities for themselves and they create communities for others. And number two, the best leaders are deeply clear about what really matters. And out from that clarity comes their excellent leadership.
Wow, that's inspiring. Just hearing immediately when you said what her AP teacher said of go back to where you belong, for me, that was like, wow, I would have never in a million years expected that because normally you hear the opposite in many different scenarios all the time, especially with education primarily being one of those, right? And for us, especially as people who don't necessarily have the opportunity or the resources all the time because of just who we are, that's really shocking in the best way possible. And hearing you talk about that culture of positive expectation, that is so fascinating to me. Can you explain, like, I know you explained a little bit when you were talking about that story, but can you explain how you were able to come up with that term?
Yeah, well, So the way that a phenomenological study works is this. The first two steps are you just do these really in-depth type of interviews. So a lot of studies that are done are really meant to be generalizable. And because you want them to be generalizable, you want as many participants as possible. So you can say we tried this out on 5,000 people. That's why we think it works. Phenomenology doesn't have to, but often takes the opposite approach. Is like you just think about you, right? You think about your story. If we were to sit down and really get your story, we'd be here all night, and that's one human. And so phenomenology says, let's drill down on the human experiences. So I just did these in-depth interviews and just let them go wherever they want. Then you have to transcribe the whole thing. And then you treat the transcription almost like a sacred text. And you're mining it for all these different things. And so I was looking for what is the commonality here, and that was the one thing that I saw, is that every time I expect, and for for background, I knew that some of these people had accessed a certain program that helped, that was like meant to support someone who looked like them, and I almost was, I thought I was throwing a softball so they could highlight that particular program, and they would take the softball that I thought that I threw at them, and they would talk about their mom, their dad, their little brother, and about how those people's expectations of them literally impacted what they thought was actually possible. Because I think the mental breakthrough is, let me put it like this, and I think that this will bring it full circle. You take a you take a black man 7 feet tall, walking down the street, and he's going to play a sport. What sport do we think he's going to play? We think
Basketball.
basketball. If that black man was born in Brazil, he would play volleyball.
Mm.
and if and if that black man was born in Europe, he'd probably play soccer and be a goalkeeper. And so our expectations really do a lot for us. And so their main mental block was that they were born into a world that, I mean, you don't need me to tell you, from the time you're born, it tells you that you can literally not access that. That's not for you. And they just had enough of a community around them that caused them to literally dream differently. And so I think like when you can bottle that up, and when you can wrap that around a person, people can really do amazing things. If I was going to link that to the world of work, because my field is leadership. I once read something in that same book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and it's called the Law of Connection. And it says that if you're a leader, everyone that you lead needs to touch three things, and he encapsulates it in three words: know, see, feel. Everyone that you touch needs to know that you see great potential in them. Everyone that you touch needs to see you being an example for them. And everyone that you touch needs to feel that you value them. When those three things happen, then you really unlock someone's ability to dream and to see themselves as more. And so they didn't have those words, and I didn't have that framework at the time, but that's what their community did for them. It just unlocked the know, see, feel, and then all of a sudden they started to dream dreams that were at the time crazy dreams, but today we know is actually quite normal.
Mm. That's interesting, of just thinking about how people impact how you dream. And I've never looked at it on a level like that because, when you are someone who's just super high achieving, especially for us, it's always like, okay, what's next? What's next? What are we going to do? And what is this impact for people behind us? Or maybe sometimes even people in front of us, whether that is for like our family, our friends, versus like, being the next inspiration for the next version of ourselves, or the younger people that are also looking for people who have the same dream. And being the first to do that is really foundational. And I know we kind of highlight that, of course, in like the history books. We highlight that in our communities. And you just made me think of that, of looking at some of these people are the first to do entirely what they're thinking of. And then that makes me wonder about their thought process of being the first to do anything, thinking like Mae Jemison going into space, or
Mhm.
even thinking about Rosa Parks, thinking about Madam C.J. Walker, thinking about Martin Luther King, just wondering where from their core as leaders, as foundational leaders that we know nationwide, how they were able to make people feel those three things that you just stated of knowing, seeing, feeling, and then creating these larger movements that enable that on such a different scale. And we have people that do that every day, and we have people that do that in smaller communities too, but just being the first, like what inspires them? Who were the leaders before them? And oftentimes it's people who felt like they couldn't do it, whether that is their older sibling, whether that is their mother, their father. And so just you peeling back the layers of how those people serve as inspiration for people to shift and still create that culture of positive expectation, even if they necessarily didn't have that or the resources to do though, I think that's also a really cool breakthrough moment as well. It's almost like how we talk about generational curse breaking. It's almost like from a psychological standpoint of how we always say we want to give our children better than what we had, but really how that is able to shift the narrative in creating some of the greatest leaders that we've ever seen and continually to see some of the leaders and how they're being developed now that we have like the resources to do so where we can evaluate that on a qualitative level.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Rosa Parks because and I love what you connected that to is, today we know her for what we know her for. But, you know, and today to do what she did doesn't carry the level of risk. But when she did it, that was like, damn near signing your own death warrant. And so I kind of work at the intersection of a lot of spaces. I my bachelor's was a double major, and one of my majors was Africana Studies. And Rosa Parks has a story that I didn't hear my whole life, that is not her story, but that she comes into the end of someone else's story. There was a young woman in the Deep South who, if I can remember her name, I'll bring it up at at some point. But she was walking home one day, I think from church, and five white men pull up their car, force her into the car, take her away, sexually assault her. And when the five white men were caught and tried, they admitted that they did it. Like they weren't like it wasn't us. They were like, yeah, we did that, and still weren't convicted simply because of race. So the NAACP is so bothered by this that they send their best investigator to go in there, see what we can do, this, that, and the third. That investigator was a younger Rosa Parks. And see, so the connection there is, she went there and she had to talk to the woman that this happened to,
Mm.
right? And, she had to, be there and just see the sheer injustice. And, so then, you fast forward into the future. Why would someone do something? Today we know she changed the world, but at the time it seemed like, look, you're gonna refuse to get up, and you're going to be taken to jail, and things are going to get rough. And remember, this is before social media, so this is not even going to make the news. Why would you do this? And when you think about the wealth of experiences that she had that produced her as that kind of a leader, that's really what I'm trying to get at.
Mhm. Yeah, I can tell by the way that you share the stories and even the through lines of like what you're looking for, but also what you've discovered. And so the fact that I was even able to be able to kind of recite that almost in words of where your research and what you're researching, like what it is leading me to even think about, like as I'm continuing to listen to you and think about the thought process and how just even thought provoking you are doing work that is enabling people to not only show how people lead, but also understanding in what ways can we learn from them and even optimize in our own leadership. And sometimes we can be very self-serving or very indulgent with our leadership. But something I heard recently when I was working on a program and we were getting feedback from members of the program, and one person said, you know, with my counterpart, because it's like a mentee mentor almost, the mentor was saying, my mentee really made me think about something that when you're a leader, you're so often thinking about, just how to get the work done, how to be efficient, how to be productive in getting the work done. And you don't ever really reflect on how you're coming across to people or really reflecting on your leadership style or your approach. And so when their counterpart asks them, how do you think about leadership or how do you change when you see how people see your approach and how they value it, what do you do? And that brought him back to a space of like, I haven't done that in quite a while because, when you get to a certain level of being a leader, you not only exactly, you have less oversight into what you used to when you were coming up. And of course, your values and your priorities are different because you are now being the leader or the executive for an organization. You are these people's advocates versus you had someone advocating for you. And so I thought that was so interesting that you get to a point where sometimes your leadership can be stifled in the workforce if you're not evaluating that while also looking at the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, actually, what you're talking about is that sadly, that's not the outlier. That's the norm. And that's why so many people have leadership coaches and different things like that. And so something that I also do is I do some work as an executive consultant where, people like that will have, sit downs with me or bring me in to work within kind of like a leadership team. And the number one thing that I find is that story told over and over and over again. And so that was one of the major things that prompted me to write the book is so the book is based on this hierarchy that I call the clarity stack. And the hierarchy is simple. It's coherence, clarity, coherence, action. And what that means is that the best way to lead or to do anything is to start with clarity. And the word that you can attach to clarity is what matters, what really matters. When you get clear on that, then you go to coherence. The question that you can add to coherence is this: does it all line up? So do your words, your actions, and your intentions actually all match? So just like a brief kind of example there is sometimes you'll see organizations that talk a lot about we want our employees to collaborate. Collaboration means everything, but all their promotion is based on the best producer. So if I want to get promoted, I understand I don't need to collaborate. I need to step on all of y'all so I can and then they always wonder like, why don't we have a spirit of a collaboration? We just watched a whole TED talk about it together and we're reading a book about collaboration. Yes, because everyone that's been promoted the past 6 months, they're all terrible collaborators, but they produce a lot on their own. So that's what I'm right. So that's what coherence means. Does it all line up? Does what you say matter? Does it line up with everything else? And then after you get through those two steps, clarity and coherence, then you go to action. And the question you can put next to action is, what's our next move? And so much of what I see in the world of work is because we're all under pressure. We all want to jump to action. And the thing about leading is not only are you under pressure, but people want you to act. People are begging you to act. So acting feels very logical. And so what often happens is that we have a lot of action, and then it happens exactly in the order that you described. And then we kind of go back. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. And so the whole the whole kind of idea behind the clarity stack is how can we have something that helps you to stay in the proper rhythm as you're reacting to things in the world of work, and to just stay in this rhythm of clarity, coherence, action. And the first two feel like you're wasting time. And so the way that I put it in the book is, I'm not asking you to slow down for the sake of slowing down. I'm asking you to slow down so that you can speed up in the right direction.
Yeah, it's often that we don't take enough time to look at what we're doing that creates that stagnancy to where we start, it starts small, where it's little things and you say, oh, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, I'll go back to it. And then by the time things pile, and now you're having to go through those pile of things to level yourself out. And then that's when you always realize, okay, now I need to truly sit down and evaluate this to get to where I want to go. And that happens even on like the smaller level. And I think that also goes back into like discipline as well. I know for myself, there's definitely been times where I'm like, I'm going to get back to that homework assignment. I'm going to get back to it. And then it's Sunday, it's 9 o'clock. There's something due at 11:59. And it's like, okay, now I got to make sure that I take everything off of my plate that I wanted to do this weekend so I can recenter myself and get this homework done. And for me, like a big part of how I lead comes into how I perform myself. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I want everyone to perform at my level, which some leaders do, but I've already recognized that does not work. But it comes into, like you were talking about before, just slowing down and really understanding what matters, and then how can you act on that through that exact framework that you've just described of what is valuable, how is it aligning? Do they all align well? Does this all make sense? And then how am I acting on it? And I think the best part about that clarity stack that you have just described is that you don't have to necessarily wait to go all the way through to reevaluate. You can reevaluate at the coherent stage. If something doesn't feel like it's right, you can go back. You can go back, you can redo it. You're not killing anything. Um, and I think that's something that some leaders often do too late, is looking at how can we in the middle of the process versus just looking at when we need to get done, and then focusing on the how and the who. And that enables people to be really effective leaders. And of course, understanding their own strengths and weaknesses as well.
So what happens when you do that is something really, really cool. Is the way that I define uh, leadership is influencing others, right? So um, this is a scenario that I think a lot of people listening have probably seen or will see, whether you've worked for a Fortune 500 company or whether you've worked at the mall. Um, the person with the official leadership title might call a meeting and say, "This happened. This is what I think we should do about it. What do you all think?" And everyone, just kind of nods their heads. Yeah, 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 sure. Let's do it. Okay, meeting ends. And then that person leaves. And we all nodded. We all said, yeah, sure, let's do it. That person leaves. And then I come to your office and I'm like, Maya, that's not going to work, right? You're like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Right. And then the real meeting takes place after the official meeting. So, and then actually, maybe amongst us, there might be one person who were like, oh, Jamal knows what he's doing. So we're all like, okay, Jamal, tell us how we're actually going to make this thing work. And so my whole point is that um, when you are the clearest person in the room, people will instinctively look to you to lead them. So you'll stop leading by shoving your title down people's throats. Do it because I said so. And people will kind of feel like this if you've ever worked with a group of people, and it feels like when so and so joined the meeting, they asked the question that got us back on track, or they made the one insight that made us realize why the thing didn't work. And when they missed the meeting felt like confusing, and like we didn't get much done. And we can't put a finger on it, but and so the best thing is when you have the leadership title and you're also that person, that is really great. But actually the thing that makes you the leader is your ability to produce something that makes people look toward you and say, hey, what should we be doing here? And so I think what often happens to leaders is because we're so pressured to act, when we act without clarity, people can see that. And then that's what causes them to kind of instinctively gravitate away from our leadership. So they're only doing what we say because they literally have to. That is just not a sustainable way to lead long term.
I think
Let me. Oh, go ahead.
I think you just brought like the power of visibility to a whole new level of like not even just from a leadership standpoint, but what it means when people feel like they can see you in the role of being a leader based on the question that you ask or how you keep the meeting on track and efficiency. So you had my wheels turning over here because I hear nowadays like the power of visibility, like whether you're a leader, whether you're doing content, the importance of just people seeing you. But of course, people seeing you with impact, right? Seeing you with influence, and then how it naturally will turn to that way, like you said, because there's always a follow up meeting after the initial meeting. It takes one Teams or one Slack, and then everybody's gathered in another room talking about, do we think this is going to work? And just knowing also how you gain influence that way, even within when it's not your own department, because people will think, oh, if you're the person with all the knowledge, then they'll say, oh, you're a great point of contact for XYZ. And then how you're building that natural influence and almost that natural instinct for your team to view you as that leader as well. So I think that's just really interesting. That's the point that I wanted to make.
No, no, I think I'm glad that you made that point because I think the real heart of what you're talking about is actually theory to practice. So let me frame it like this. Let's say you've been listening to this point and you're like, that makes sense. This guy knows what he's talking about. Okay, that's still like when you go to a museum and you look at a Basquiat or you look at a Van Gogh. That doesn't mean you could paint. And so my real goal is how do we uh, pull it out of the clean, nice, neat world of a theory and put it into your hands so that you can do this, not just hey, you should read this book by Dr. Ayeni. He'll tell you what to do. You can actually, in your own space, do this. Let me give you a very practical example of what this looks like when you kind of rip it out of theory and slap it into the real messy world. I think we have all been to meetings, and at the end of that meeting, we're like, that was an absolute waste of my time, right? Like that meeting is an example of why we have email, so that you can email me that and not waste my time and call into this meeting. So what I so if we were to take this clarity stack model, clarity, coherence, action, and apply it to that, here's exactly how I would do it. I'd say, okay, you're about to call a meeting. Hold on, let's get clear. Let me ask you a question. What are meetings for? Are there different types of meetings? What types of meetings are needed specifically for leaders? I have a different set for managers, and maybe at another time we'll talk about the difference between the two. But just for leaders, there are three basic types of meetings. They're relational, transactional, and how would I would say pop up, right? So relational, transaction, pop up. So the difference is this: a transactional meeting is designed to get a specific set of things done. So by the end of this meeting, we will decide whether we're going to roll out that marketing campaign. That's a transactional meeting. I don't really care how you're doing. You don't really care how I'm doing. We're not going around saying names. We're just starting the work, right? Then there's pop-up meetings, which is an unexpected thing happened and we need to come up with a solution for it. So think of it like every meeting in April of 2020 was a pop-up meeting. Like apparently there's a pandemic. How are we going to keep our kind of organization open? And then there are relational meetings are designed to allow you to strengthen the human bonds. So how I answered your very first question of, hey, tell me about yourself, that was an answer that I'd give at a relational meeting. I'm telling about my foundational story, but at a transactional meeting, I'd be like, hi, I'm Dr. Tadé Ayeni. I'm the director of leadership education. Okay, let's get to it. And so that's clarity, right? You get clear. Hey, there's three types of meetings. What type of meeting am I actually calling? And then then you say I'm calling a transactional meeting. Here's why that's really important, because you have to over communicate the expectation so that people know what kind of meeting they're actually coming to. So, for example, if I believe that I'm coming to a transactional meeting where we're going to make some key decisions on whether we're going to roll this thing out or not, and then you are leading the meeting and you're like, hey, Tade, tell us about your why. I'm so annoyed. I'm like, we don't got time to hear about my why, right? But likewise, if I believe I'm coming to a relational meeting where we're going to strengthen our bonds, and you're just going over quarterly numbers, you look cold and callous to me now. So just by number one, clarity, getting clear on what type of meeting we're going to have. Then coherence. Coherence means does it all line up? Now you structure that entire meeting based on what type of meeting we are going to have. So we don't need icebreakers. We don't need to go around and get names if we're just doing a transactional meeting. We need to get to it. We need to have the Google Doc opened already, right? Um, and then that leads to action. And then action is actually calling the meeting. So if it's a transactional meeting, and we're going to get all this work done, then maybe there's some context people should have, done before they come to the meeting. I'm going to over communicate that. Um, just like if I'm going to have a relational meeting, it's really uncomfortable if you show up to a meeting and I say, hey, tell us about your why. That's a question that you probably would have appreciated having a whole week to think about. And what stories do I want to tell? What stories are too personal? What da 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 da. So sometimes you may have a leader, who, if you take that way, you get clear. Okay, this is the kind of meeting that I'm going to call, or I'm going to stack these three. First 20 minutes, we are going to be relational. Then I'm going to intentionally transition us to being transactional, right? And then I'm going to intentionally transition us to this next thing. Then that leads to coherence. Everything that you do related to that meeting will line up. And then the action is that you'll have that kind of a meeting. See, people don't have all that theory. All they know is that when Amaya runs the meeting, it's the best. And so we instinctively say anybody could, no, 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 we want her to run the meeting. Anybody could do this. Oh, no, 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 we want her. They can't put their thumb on it. It's actually because you're deeply clear when everyone else is deeply busy. And that's the kind of real theory to practice that I'm really interested in getting to the heart of.
And I love it. Ev- Everything you were saying, I was just like, yeah, like I could think of examples literally going down, thinking of from having those relational ones, having transactionals, and having those spontaneous meetings, right? That can sometimes be a combination of both, depending on what you're dealing with at the time, and what's coming up, whether that's a pivot of a project change, something completely falling through. I love that you gave more context to that and like the theoretical background from it. I love being able to put that into practice, like you were saying. We're really understanding like the why of why we're practicing it the way that we do, and not even just understanding like, oh, we're just doing this because it's effective, but like here's why it's effective, and this enables us to be better leaders, whether that's even just leading a meeting, because we have to understand how people look at these things, right? And how people look at that in perspective. And that is important too. How am I creating the most value? AKA, why do these people care about what I'm saying? Or how am I going to make these people care about what I'm saying? And if I'm the person setting the tone, I have the full power to do just that, of setting the clarity of what value I'm providing to this meeting, what I am looking to in terms of action items for them to create, and then overall, how does it all wrap together in a nice little bow that everybody can go away saying, I know exactly what I'm going to do after this. So I love that you talked about that. And I think one thing that we kind of alluded to earlier that I would love to hear your thoughts on the differences, and sometimes maybe even the similarities of, leaders and then managers. And managers are those, our common assumed leaders, but also, what can kind of skew managers from really aligning with that title.
Yeah, yeah. I really love that question because I think clarity comes from better questions. And that's a question that most people don't ask because they assume that the difference is just in job title. Um, the way that I think about that is this. To me, you can see the difference by asking yourself this. What's the essential question that a good manager comes back to over and over again? And what's the essential question that a leader comes back to over and over again? This is how I would answer it. If other, like honestly, if someone was listening right now, I would say a good exercise is to just literally pause it right here and try to answer that, and then just compare what you have to mine, because in the gap between what you have and what I have, you might have some insights that I missed. But here's how I would answer it. The essential question that a good manager asks is this: how do we get this done? The essential questions that a good leader asks is two things. Um, why are we doing this? How will this impact people? And and the reason for that is because management is essentially about completing objectives, and leadership is essentially about how you influence and how you motivate the humans involved in completing those things. One of the other really good definitions that I love related to leadership is inspiring others to achieve, serving them so they can, and then celebrating them when they do. And so the way that I would put it is that um, because the essential questions that they come back to are different, the way that you would evaluate them and the way that they evaluate themselves is also different. The way that you evaluate a manager is did the project get done? If it got done, then good job. The way that you evaluate a leader is how were the people that were impacted, and where are we in terms of our why. So um, that's all theory. Let me bring it into practice and tell you why the answer to that question matters, right? And what I mean is, you could ask what's the Pythagorean theorem, and someone could give you an answer, but it doesn't change anything in your life today, right? So I don't want the answer that I just gave you to stay in that realm. So let me pull it into the real world. Well, there are two, there are three ways to become an official leader. With the obvious leadership title: director, vice president, CEO, and that's through high performance, through management, and through leadership. Most leaders get there in one of the first two ways. They are excellent performers. They're high performers, and they're known for high performance. So then their individual high performance gets them an opportunity to be a manager. And managing is that same high performance, but pushing other people towards getting something done. So before you were getting a lot done on your own, now you're still getting a lot done, and you're just interfacing with other people to get a lot done. Leading is in a very different category. And so what often happens, and this is honestly why I think leadership coaches exist, and why I get a lot of work related to that, is because people finally get the official leadership title, and now 80% of your job is actually leading, which is influencing others, which is inspiring others, serving others, celebrating others. And the thing that got you here was high performance and management. So because that's what got you here, you will lean into that. And when you lean into that in a leadership role, it just doesn't work, because now you're doing a completely different job. So the point of even thinking about the difference between these is that it helps you to be more effective. What happens in the messy world of work is this: you can have a leadership title, and there will be some teams and some situations that require you to be a manager today. You can have a manager title, and there will be some situations and some teams that require you to lead today. So you getting clear on the difference between these three will actually help you to diagnose what's the situation and what's the team asking of me. So then you can apply the right mind frame and the right skill set to actually be effective. So that's why, just to wrap up the thought, what I always say is that the best leaders are doing about 80% leading, 20% managing. The best managers are doing about 20%, 80% managing and about 20% leading. And so it's really about making that differentiation so that you can apply the right skill set to the right situation.
I like that. And I think there's, those gifted people who somehow do both. And
Yeah.
I think that's getting to be hopefully more common. I can definitely say that like the manager that I have at this current time, she's definitely both a great manager and a great leader. And so I've definitely been learning from her, and I like the theory to practice and like pulling it into the real world. So I think that's a great way for us to wrap up, especially with you talking about that being your wrap up thought. I want to close us out by asking, throughout this entire journey of, you studying essentially what is leadership and what does it look like? How has that impacted how you lead? So I want to know from your perspective, how do you lead, or what is your leadership philosophy for yourself?
Well, I think the thing about having clarity of thought is that we often everyone's hindsight is 2020. We often are able to look back and realize what mattered. But I think having to study it for a living, it's just helped me to realize beforehand what matters and then keep that in the fore. So everything I just told you, management is not easier than leadership. It's not more. It's not less valuable. It's just more common because as we're starting our careers, we'll probably get a chance to manage before we'll get a chance to lead. And
Mhm.
so when I had to begin making that switch, and I love what you said about people having to do both. That is the point of actually knowing the difference. It's so that you can do both well. And so when I got clear about leadership, I said to myself this: creating communities is what matters. And you can't have community without having psychological safety. And, psychological safety is a very packed term, but an oversimplified but helpful way to think about it is that you have these spaces where people try their best, people make mistakes, we own those mistakes, and then we keep trying our best. And that whole process, there's no fear involved. We're all just having each other's backs, right? So, um, with that as a model, I'll have all these different moments where, so for example, someone called me and basically told me, "Hey, I made a mistake, and because I made a mistake, you're gonna have to do more work, Tade." So humanly, you're like, that doesn't sound like it works for me, right? And right there, you have a split second to react, and something in you wants to penalize it because when we, really hammer something in, then the person won't do it again, right? But my literal response was, "Hey, thanks for calling to tell me." Because the person could have just sent an email, and then I said, "Okay, well, what do you need from me so that we can get it done?" And I just kept the thing really low pressure and really normal. And if you've ever led right now, you might be freaking out because you're like, that person is going to think that they can just do whatever they want and that there are no consequences. And that was playing in the back of my mind. But I had already decided in terms of clarity, what matters is creating psychologically safe spaces that have high standards. So and so my real concern was I want this person to be able to call me whenever they make a mistake. And it's normal that you own it and that we then try to figure out what to do. So I responded in such a way. And so that is something that you wouldn't have noticed. It wasn't this big thing. We didn't get some huge kind of initiative off of the ground, but those types of things add up to create the kind of environment where, to bring it full story, someone once said this to me, and they don't realize how much of a compliment it was. They just said it matter of fact. They're like, Tade, I feel like you're just always rooting for me. And like, I was surprised to hear them say that because we didn't work together that much. We just, worked together sometime. And so like when you're clear that that's how you want to lead and it's not just about the objectives, then in all those split seconds where you need to do something, that'll increase the chance that you'll have the coherence, meaning that who you said you wanted to be and who you are actually matches up. And then that'll add the impact to a lot of your actions. So I guess I would just leave people with that, with clarity, coherence, action, really can do a lot and really means a lot. There's an African proverb that I guess I'll just wrap up with, which is, it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I don't think truer words have been said and in closing out like an episode. And I think that that perfectly encapsulates how you lead, and it's rooted in storytelling for sure, in how you lead and how you build community around that. One, from just those who can relate, and then two, those who will be able to relate later on once
Yeah.
they've heard this story and how that affects them, and also positively helping them to achieve their dreams or even recognizing what is needed to achieve their dream. Um, and I appreciate you for just being in the field that you're in, and really being able to impact how we view leadership, and how we can all be better leaders with your theory and helping us put it into practice, and just your consistent knowledge within the field and your expertise. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really excited to see, what you're gonna do in these next 2 or 3 years now that you've hit this kind of awesome milestone. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Anytime. You are welcome anytime.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Intentional Intern podcast. We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a boost of motivation to take on your career journey. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and share it with your network. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback fuels our next great episode. Until next time, stay intentional, keep growing, and keep shining bright. See you in the next episode.